Dependent Origination, an explanation of the Buddha's Paticca Samuppada by Brian Taylor. Dependent Origination. Paticca Samuppada. The Buddha's teaching of dependent origination is a fast-track method for experiencing Nibbana. It is recorded in the last book of the Abhidhamma Pitaka. This is the third part of the Tipitaka, the three baskets, Pitaka equals baskets, of Theravedic Buddhist texts. The Abhidhamma Pitaka is a compilation dating from after the Buddha's death. In it, various themes from the suttas are schematized in order to codify them and bring out their logical connectedness. This booklet provides a translation of the Pali terms, an explanation of how the logical structure works, and gives a comprehensive explanation of the meaning and intention. Most Westerners find the dependent origination difficult. Consequently, when they come to translate it, they misinterpret key terms. Their attempts to explain the overall meaning are often very long and complicated, use unusual or unfamiliar words, and fail to provide anything which a reader can use. Easterners also find it difficult and are generally much better at memorizing and chanting it than at making clear the meaning. And it is the meaning that counts. Buddhism is a practical religion. The Buddha explains how things are and what one can do to put an end to suffering forever. We are then supposed to get on and do something. Until we understand the tools he supplies us with, we do not progress easily. This booklet is intended to assist this undertaking by explaining what the tools are and how to use them. Pali is a language without its own alphabet. The Buddhist teachings, the suttas, were delivered orally by the Buddha and passed on orally by his monks for about 400 years, until it was decided at the Fourth Council that they should be written down. No single script was ever developed for the language of the canon. Scribes use the scripts of their native languages to transcribe the texts, and they have been transliterated into various languages until today. The language Shakyamuni the Buddha spoke was the one in general use around the middle reaches of the Ganges, where he was active. Since the area was later called Magadha, its language was called Magadhi. Traditionally, this language has been called Pali by Theravedic Buddhists. Recently, scholars have attempted to show that Pali and Magadhi are basically different languages. This is the kind of thing scholars do to make a living. But looking back to a period over 2,500 years ago in northern India, where there is nothing in the way of contemporary written evidence, means that there is no serious basis for their conclusions. Pali is the name which has been given to the language of the Buddha's authentic teachings. There is no reason to look any further. For transliteration, I have mostly followed Rhys Davids and Steed in their dictionary, and Yana T. Loka and the Buddhist Publication Society. Paticca Samuppada. Avijja paccaya sankara, sankara paccaya vijnanam, vijnana paccaya namarupam, namarupa paccaya salayatanam, salayatana paccaya passo, passa paccaya vedana, vedana paccaya tanha, tanha paccaya upadanam, upadana paccaya bhavo, bhava paccaya jati, jati paccaya jara maranam, soka parideva dukkha, domanasa upayasa sambhavanti. Dependent origination. Avijja forms the base for sankharas, sankharas form the base for consciousness, consciousness forms the base for name and form form the base for the six sense basis, the six sense basis form the base for contact, contact forms the base for feeling, feeling forms the base for craving, craving forms the base for clinging, clinging forms the base for becoming, becoming forms the base for birth, birth forms the base for old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Logical structure. Forms the base for is a better way of translating paccaya than because of or from, and is closer to the linguistic meaning, foundation. Forms the base for indicates how the logic of this discourse works. Imagine a column of bricks, one above the other. Each brick forms the base for the one above. This suggests that, even if the factors were to come into place one after another, once they are in place, they are all there in the present moment. Avijja is the base brick. With avijja in place, all the other bricks form a column above it. Each one rests on the one below. All rest on the base brick. If you remove avijja, the whole column tumbles down. It is necessary to understand what each of the terms for each individual brick means. 1. Avijja, a plus vijja. Vijja means seeing, cognate with vision, and also understanding what you see. In this case it means seeing the world and everything in it as it actually is, without projecting viewpoints upon what you are looking at, which makes it appear otherwise. This means correct seeing or right view. Seeing correctly means seeing unsatisfactory things as unsatisfactory. Avijja, a plus vijja, means not seeing things as they actually are. Not seeing unsatisfactory things as unsatisfactory. 2. Sankhara. A sankhara is a compound, something made up of bits, not a thing in itself. If you take away all the bits, there is nothing left over. Like a motor car, apart from all the parts put together in a certain way, there is no car, just the idea of a car. Everything mental and physical is a sankhara except nibbana. If you can see everything that arises in the world and in your mind like this, then you're seeing it with vijja. If you see any of these sankharas as things in themselves, existing as separate entities rather than as part of the flow of karma, cause and effect, then you are seeing the world and the mind from the point of view of avijja. Avijja becomes the first brick. Sankharas sit on top of it and make up the second brick. Because of false view, they appear as many different individual things. This makes possible the further entrapment of the mind. 3. Vijnana. Vijnana means consciousness. Consciousness too cannot exist as a thing in itself. It can only exist if there is something to be conscious of, sense object, and an active sense organ. This threesome makes up the fundamental sankhara in the functioning of the human mind. There has to be something to be conscious of. When a sankhara, mental or physical, arises and there is a sense organ to perceive it, then the presence of object and sense organ gives rise to consciousness of that object. This is the third brick and sits on top of sankharas. Because avidya is still in position at the bottom of the column, consciousness appears as consciousness of a separate thing in itself. The mind is now one stage further in the entrapment process. For Namarupa. Namarupa means name and form. That is the obvious and original meaning of these words. With your eye you see a form, but as soon as you give it a name, it makes possible a particularized interpretation of sense phenomena. You superimpose a mental concept upon the experience, upon the perceived visible object. You impose viewpoint. This is my Ming vase. Is this my Ming vase or your flower pot? From this point on, all phenomena open the door to identification and possessiveness. Their true nature is as anatta, non-self, is hidden. Later scholars redefined nama and rupa in terms of body and mind. A conceptual distinction was made between mental, feeling, perception, will, desire, consciousness, etc., and material, everything making up the physical universe in terms of the four elements. This replaced the actual experience of the seeing of a form and labelling it. It encouraged ever more thinking about the here and now. Practical application was and is lost. What nama and rupa have in common is that they are both conditioned by consciousness. That is to say, if there were no consciousness of them, they would cease to exist for us. This doesn't mean that the world would cease to exist for us. For as long as eyes can see and there are things to be seen, there will be and has always been consciousness of the world. When the mind labels things, it fashions them as independently existing entities rather than seeing them as part of an impersonal causal flow. It is like being unable to see the ocean for the waves. We end up preferring big foamy billowing rollers to tiny ripples. We give them separate names to emphasize their differentness and enshrine our points of view. We mourn their inevitable disappearance, though we can still write their biographies and even put our names on the title page. Namarupa is the fourth brick and sits on top of consciousness. Since avidya is still in position at the bottom of the column, the process of entrapment proceeds. 5. Salayatana. Salayatana are the six sense bases: eye, ear, nose, tongue, touch, and mind. These enable sense objects to be differentiated into mental and physical, and also into more particularized sense objects: sights, sounds, smells, tastes, and touch. The greater the proliferation of names to fit the forms we perceive, the more discriminating mental activity becomes, the greater the detail perceived. But since avidya is still in position at the bottom of the column, all the contents of this more detailed experience appear as separately existing things in themselves, rather than as an impersonal causal flow. 6. Phassa is contact, touch, and therefore a sense impression. Things which are flowing fast are individually perceived and recorded as sense impressions, including mind impressions. And since avijja is still in position at the bottom of the column, these impressions are perceived as being separate things in themselves rather than part of the flow. One is sitting looking at the sea and begins to see all of the waves as different individuals rather than just and only moving water. 7. Vedana. Vedana means feeling, mental or physical, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. If one is able to contemplate feeling as just feeling when it arises without allowing it to connect with the sense object associated with it, one can stop the chain at that point. One can do this by patiently investigating feelings and seeing that all feelings have the same three characteristics: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, not self. They are seen, therefore, as not worth grasping after. In this case, although the Vedana brick sits squarely on the Phassa brick, seeing that all feelings are not worth grasping after prevents grasping and clinging from arising. Effectively, one is able to introduce avijja in the form of right view at this point. If one can't do this, then since avijja is still in position at the bottom of the column, Vedana becomes the base for the next brick. 8. Tanha. Tanha is compulsive desire. It is usually translated as craving, but really means thirst. If one thinks of the compulsive thirst of the alcoholic, one is not far off the meaning. Because one experiences pleasant feelings as desirable, one desires them and becomes attached to them. The more desirable one finds them, the greater the desire. So Tanha takes its place above Vedana as the 8th brick. Because of avijja, which is still in position at the bottom of the column, a cluster of characteristics in the flow of causation is seen as a thing in itself. One singles out something which fits a point of view. The pleasant feeling it gives causes desire for that thing. This strong desire, tanha, then becomes the base for the next brick. 9. Upadana. Upadana is usually translated as clinging. Literally it means taking up, so grasping might be better. The difference between tanha and upadana is that one craves something which one hasn't at that moment got. Once one has it, one clings to it. Again, avijja is still in position at the bottom of the column and makes one see the sense object as a thing in itself. One tries to grasp it and hold onto it. This is like trying to catch a wave in a fishing net and hold onto it. So grasping takes its place as the 9th brick. 10. Bhava. Bhava means becoming, the flow of existence. The previous bricks create an onward flowing energy so that there is a desire and a need to become something, some independently existing permanent entity. One thinks of oneself under the influence of avijja as a something or a someone, and one wants to repeat this endlessly in the future. One wants to be forever. Bhava rests upon Upadana. Bhava flows into 11. Jati. Jati means birth. The urge to become something leads to being born as that something, even though the something itself is just a part of the flow of cause and effect, another wave, part of the ocean. Once there is a birth, a beginning, there is inevitably a death, an ending, and also inevitably between birth and death come 12. Jara maranang soka parideva dukkha do manasa upayasa sambhavanti. Old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. All things are experienced between birth and death. Because there are no permanent entities, columns of cause and effect rise into existence like waves in the sea, then sink down again and disappear from view. Everything teaches the Buddha that has a beginning has an end. Whatever is born dies. If you don't want to grow old and die, then avoid birth. The flow of the dependent origination is incessant, both in the long term from life to life, and also in the present from moment to moment. Escape is only possible if the avijja brick is removed. Then the whole column of bricks collapses and only vidya remains. It is like awakening from a bad dream, a nightmare. Then things are accepted as they are clearly seen to be, impermanent, unsatisfactory, and without a self. There is no longer any desire for or grasping after the undesirable. Understanding of this is not quite enough. What is needed is seeing the truth continuously from moment to moment. Patient investigation of all phenomena that arise in one's life results first in understanding, then in seeing. If one's concentration is good and one is skilled in Buddhist meditation, the goal is reached much more quickly than if one isn't. In either case, one's morality needs to be complete. Basic morality: don't do to others what you don't want done to you. This normalizes your relationship with your fellow beings and is a necessary prerequisite for living in peace. If one can take on board the 5 Buddhist precepts, so much the better. Basic morality helps to make the goal of Nibbana achievable. If these five precepts were kept throughout the human world, it would make an unbelievable difference. There would be no war, no serious crime, and no need for money to be spent on armies, policing, courts of justice, or prisons. From Basic Buddhism for a World in Trouble. Appendix 1. Avidya. If this term is not translated correctly and understood, the result is that open-eyed meditation on dependent origination cannot be practiced correctly, and a preview of Nibbana, the state of stream enterer, attained. Everywhere avidya is translated as ignorance, especially ignorance of the Four Noble Truths. Ignorance means not knowing. Knowledge refers to data which is retained in the mind. It can be factually correct. I know your aunt. I know the French for thank you. It can be incorrect. I know 2 plus 2 equals 5. In the latter case, you do know something. It just happens to be wrong. Ignorance is simply not knowing. I don't know your aunt. I don't know any French. I don't know 2 plus 2 equals anything. Vidya is usually translated as knowledge, but vidya is different from knowledge. it is not just data retained in the mind. It means actually seeing in the present and having immediate understanding of something in the present. Many Buddhists know the Four Noble Truths. They can repeat them in the way a child can repeat its 9 times table. They are certainly not ignorant of them, but this knowledge is not sufficient to remove avidya as the first step in the dependent origination. It cannot thereby bring about the psychological process which the Buddha experienced under the Bodhi tree, and by which he achieved enlightenment. On the contrary, most Buddhists, even those who are fluent in their knowledge of the First Noble Truth, cannot even see that the food on their plates got there as the result of being bred in captivity and killed, usually painfully. They cannot see suffering in its entirety. So vidya is not knowledge, and avidya is not ignorance. Vidya is seeing. Seeing the First Noble Truth means seeing suffering wherever it appears, immediately with direct, decisive understanding. The corpse on the plate, the screaming child, the widow at the funeral, the old man crying silently as he dies. Avidya means not seeing these things with immediate understanding in the present, wherever they appear. Knowledge means just knowing things as facts, stored mentally in the memory banks together with the sun rises in the east. A jellyfish sting can be unpleasant. Christmas Day celebrates the birth of Jesus, although it is believed he was born on an altogether different day. Ignorance means not even knowing the facts, i.e. not having these data in the mind. See Sangyojana, Buddha's doctrine of the 10 fetters. Appendix 2. It is important to grasp that if the avidya brick is removed, the whole column of bricks falls instantaneously, and the problem of suffering is solved. The following true story illustrates this. During the First World War, a middle-aged woman heard a knock on her door. When she opened it, she found an army officer in uniform. He said he was very sorry to have to tell her that her son had been killed in action. He said that her son had been a hero who had died for his country. He asked if there was anything he could do to help her. This had a catastrophic effect on the woman. She had lost her only son and would have to face the future without his companionship and support. She would have to deal with all the practical consequences of his death and inform the other members of the family. The following days brought a sense of despair and hopelessness. The meaning had gone out of her life. 3 weeks later, there was another knock on the door. It was a different army officer in uniform. He said he had news for her. There had been a mistake. Her son had not been killed. He was alive and well. The effect on the woman was immediate. Her grieving stopped. She lost all her concerns about facing a future alone and without her son. There were now no practical consequences of his death that she would have to deal with. 5 minutes before she had been in despair, now she was happy and relieved. But her son had not come back from the dead. Nothing in the outside world had actually changed. He had been alive all along. It was just that the contents of her mind had changed instantaneously. Or consider an old bucket that has stood for a long time in the garden, filling to the brim with rain and debris. One day the gardener lifts it and the rusted bottom falls out. Everything that has rested on the bottom, irrespective of what it is, falls out instantly. So it is with the Avijja brick. Once it is removed, the column with all the other bricks collapses. In the present, freedom from suffering and nibbana are attained. Appendix 3. Dependent origination should not be considered as either a scholastic or etymological treatise. It is a practical psychological explanation of how suffering arises and the psychological steps to be taken in the here and now to reach enlightenment directly. It is the Buddhist equivalent of the account of the fall of man recorded in the book of Genesis. But unlike Genesis, it provides a way of reversing the fall. The Jews had to wait until the coming of the Messiah for a practical instruction for re-entering the Garden of Eden, or the Kingdom of Heaven. The Buddha's teaching of dependent origination is a fast-track method for experiencing nibbana with your eyes open. This has been Dependent Origination, an explanation of the Buddha's Paticca Samuppada by Brian Taylor.